Prices hit a new high since the start of the war with Iran, rising to an average of $4.23 a gallon today. This is according to AAA. The milestone comes as oil prices have surged higher over the past week amid a dual blockade by the U.S. and Iran of the Strait of Hormuz. That's a critical choke point for transporting crude and petroleum-based products out of the Persian Gulf. Gasoline prices have climbed about $1.25 a gallon, or more than 30% since the start of the war in late February. According to AAA, gas costs $4.23 a gallon on average nationwide. In Omaha, gas prices were up another 7 cents overnight and are up 43 cents a gallon from a week ago.